They gathered everything she owned as if her life were nothing more than scraps to be thrown away. Her stepmother stood at the center of the yard, eyes sharp with hatred, while the jealous relatives circled around her like vultures sensing a final kill. One by one they dragged out the clothes she had stitched by hand, the books she cherished, the tiny keepsakes she had collected since childhood. Each item held a memory, a breath of who she was, and she felt her heart clench as they tossed them into a heap. The air was thick with smoke even before the fire began, as if the world already knew what was coming and mourned before the flames touched anything. She tried to step forward, to protest, to save at least one piece of her past, but the sharp glare from her stepmother froze her feet in place. It wasn't just about the objects. It was about erasing her, stripping her down until her existence meant nothing. The fire started small, a single spark licking the edge of a cloth, but once it caught, the flames rose greedily, devouring everything with terrifying hunger. She watched the colors of her clothes melt into black ash, watched the edges of her books curl and split apart, their stories disappearing into smoke. Some of the relatives laughed, pretending not to notice the devastation on her face. Others whispered to each other, pretending this was discipline or justice, even though everyone knew it was cruelty born from envy. Her stepmother didn't laugh. Instead, she watched with a satisfied smile, a smile that told her this was only the beginning of what she planned. It was a moment meant to break her, to leave her hollow and directionless. The heat from the fire pushed against her skin, making her eyes water, but she refused to let a single tear fall for their pleasure. She stood still, spine straight, though her chest felt like it was collapsing inward. She felt the loss of every burned memory, every charred piece of her life. But as the flames hissed and snapped, she felt something else, something strange, subtle, like a faint pull beneath the crackling. It wasn't loud, not even clear, but it tugged at her attention with the insistence of a whisper carried by wind. She didn't understand it at first. She thought it was the heat making her dizzy, or the grief trying to play tricks on her senses. But the feeling grew stronger, more persistent, almost as if the ashes themselves were stirring. She waited until the fire had eaten most of the pile, until only glowing embers remained. The crowd began to move away, satisfied with the destruction, leaving her alone with the fading flames. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the ashes not for anything whole. She knew nothing could have survived, but for the source of that strange pull. Her breath slowed, her mind went quiet, and she lowered herself closer to the remnants of her past. Then, beneath a layer of blackened dust, she saw something glint faintly, something that should not have survived but somehow had. It was small, hidden, waiting. Her heart kicked against her ribs as she realized the fire had revealed something instead of destroying everything. It felt as though the ashes were calling her toward it, guiding her hand, urging her to look deeper. She reached out slowly, knowing instinctively that whatever lay beneath was not meant to be found by anyone but her. When the last flames finally sank into glowing orange embers, the yard fell silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the wind was holding its breath. She stood alone before the charred remains of everything she had ever claimed as hers. Smoke drifted upward in thin, wavering spirals, carrying pieces of her past into the sky, scattering them where she could never retrieve them. And yet, despite the ruin, something tugged at her senses, faint at first, then steadily growing like a heartbeat beneath the earth. It drew her closer to the ashes, to the very spot where the fire had burned the hottest. She didn't understand why she felt so certain that something was waiting for her, something the flames had tried but failed to swallow. She knelt beside the blackened mound, ignoring the heat that still pulsed from it. Her hands hovered over the ashes, her fingers trembling as though they already knew what she might uncover. The remnants shifted slightly, stirred not by the wind but by something beneath them. She froze. For a moment she wondered if her grief was making her imagine things, but then she saw it, a faint glimmer, so small she would have missed it if she weren't looking so closely. It flickered like a buried ember, but the color was wrong. It wasn't orange or red. It shimmered silver, steady and unburned, as though untouched by the fire that consumed everything else. Her breath hitched. Nothing she owned should have been able to survive such flames. Every cloth had burned, every page had curled into dust. So what was this thing that defied destruction? She brushed the top layer of ash aside, and the glimmer brightened, pushing through like a secret refusing to remain buried. It was as if the ashes were reluctantly revealing what they had been keeping hidden. She felt a tremor run through her chest, not fear but anticipation, something deep and instinctive, urging her not to stop. Slowly, carefully, she dug her fingers into the warm ash. The soot clung to her skin, smearing her palms with black streaks, but she didn't care. The deeper she reached, the stronger that strange pull became. The glimmer began to take form. A corner, a curve, a shape that didn't belong to destruction but to intention. A message. A memory. A piece of her past that refused to die. When she finally lifted it free, she felt a shock run up her arm, not painful but powerful, as if the object itself was exhaling after being trapped. It was warm, warmer than the surrounding ash, as though it had its own heartbeat. She held it between her fingers, wiping away the soot until the full surface revealed itself. It was a small metal piece, impossibly intact, engraved with markings she hadn't seen in years. As she stared at it, recognition flickered in her eyes. This object had belonged to someone she loved. Someone who had given it to her with a promise that it would always guide her when she felt lost. She thought it had vanished long ago. Yet here it was, preserved in the very fire meant to destroy her. The ashes around her shifted again, almost subtly bowing to the uncovered piece, and she understood then that the past they tried to erase was not gone. Something had chosen to remain. Something wanted her to find it. The flames had taken much from her, but they had failed to consume the truth buried beneath. And now that truth was in her hands, glowing faintly as though it held the beginning of a path she had never known existed. Night settled heavily over the compound, wrapping everything in shadows thick enough to swallow sound. It was the kind of darkness that made secrets easier to keep, and she needed that more than ever. The fire pit where her belongings had been burned still lay in the open yard, a circle of blackened earth that everyone believed held nothing but cold remnants and forgotten pieces of her life. But she knew better. The strange glimmer she had found earlier wouldn't leave her mind. It tugged at her thoughts, whispers of unfinished truths drifting through her memory. And so, long after the household had fallen asleep, she stepped silently into the night, her bare feet brushing over the cool ground. The moon hung low, its pale light barely enough to outline the edges of the ash pile. Most would see only a ruin, a pile of soot best left untouched. But she felt the same pull as before, a quiet hum beneath her ribs, drawing her closer. She knelt again, her heartbeat echoing in her ears as she reached into the ashes. The air around them felt different at night, quieter, almost reverent, as though the darkness itself was guarding her search. She moved slowly, brushing aside the top layers of ash, letting her fingers sink deeper into the warm dust. Bits of charred wood and fragments of cloth crumbled at her touch. Nothing should have survived the flames. They had made sure of that. Everything they believed tied her to her identity, her history, her sense of self, burned. But as she sifted deeper, she felt something firm beneath her fingertips. Not metal this time. Not wood. Something softer, yet solid. Something ancient. Her breath caught. She brushed the soot aside more carefully, her fingertips tracing the outline of a delicate corner. It was small, triangular, almost insignificant in shape, but when she touched it, a faint vibration pulsed through her hand. She froze. She pressed her fingers lightly against it again, and the vibration returned, subtle, rhythmic, like a heartbeat trapped in paper. A corner of parchment. Her throat tightened. How could parchment survive a fire intense enough to swallow fabric and wood? She reached in deeper with both hands, slowly lifting it free from its burial place. Ash trickled off its edges as if unwilling to let go, and the moment it touched open air, it shimmered, faintly but unmistakably. The parchment was old, older than anything she had owned, older perhaps than her stepmother ever realized. The surface was rough, worn by years and touched by smoke, but the corner itself remained intact, untouched by flame. She held it up to the moonlight. The vibration grew stronger, spreading through her fingers and traveling up her arms, leaving a tingling sensation beneath her skin. It wasn't frightening. It felt familiar. Like something she had known once, long ago, before her life had been twisted and narrowed by those determined to break her. She swallowed deeply, unable to tear her gaze from the small piece of surviving parchment. As she turned it carefully, the faintest markings came into view, lines too fine to be random, curves that suggested they belonged to something greater. It wasn't just paper. It was a fragment of a design, a hint of something larger, something meant to be read or followed. Her pulse quickened. A surviving corner meant there had once been a hole. What had the rest of it shown? Her eyes flicked toward the house, where the people who had tried to erase her slept unaware. She clutched the parchment to her chest, the vibration now steady against her skin. Whatever this was, it hadn't been meant to vanish. It had resisted the flames for a reason. And though she didn't yet understand what that reason was, she felt the truth settle into her bones. This surviving corner was alive, awake, and waiting for her. And she intended to find out why. She carried the faintly vibrating parchment back to her room with the cautious reverence of someone holding a heartbeat in her hands. Once inside, she closed the door silently, pressing her back against it for a moment as she steadied her breath. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the moon through the small window, but it was enough. She sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, and placed the fragile corner of parchment gently before her. For a long moment she simply stared at it. The vibration was stronger now, pulsing like a quiet reminder that it had survived for a purpose. With trembling fingers she reached for the edge and unfolded it. To her shock, the corner was not alone. Hidden beneath layers of soot and tightly curled by heat, the parchment continued opening, slowly, stubbornly, as though awakening after years of forced silence. The edges were charred in some places, browned in others, but the center remained astonishingly clear. As the parchment stretched out fully, its true size became clear. It was larger than she expected, almost as wide as both her hands placed side by side. And on its surface, faint lines, symbols, and markings emerged as though the moonlight itself breathed life back into them. Her breath hitched. This wasn't an ordinary page. It wasn't a scrap from a book or a piece of decorative craft. It was too deliberate, too ancient, too heavy with meaning. It was a map. Her heart thudded harder, each beat echoing memories she had long buried. She remembered being small, barely able to form full sentences, sitting in her mother's lap as her mother whispered stories of places she must never speak of to anyone. Her mother's hands would draw imaginary shapes in the air, curves that formed rivers, jagged lines that became mountains, circles that marked places of power. Back then she didn't understand any of it. It was just a bedtime story, a secret mother-daughter ritual shared in the quiet of night. But now, as she traced the delicate lines on the parchment, she realized those shapes were the same ones she had seen her mother sketch when she thought no one was watching. Her mother had known this map. Perhaps she had even guarded it. Why had it been hidden? Why had it been burned with her belongings? And why did it refuse to burn? Her fingers drifted across the map's surface. The vibration intensified, no longer rhythmic but responsive, aware of her touch, almost guiding her hand toward certain markings. A river drawn like a silver thread ran across the parchment, ending in a wide, circular symbol at its edge. Beneath the symbol was a mark, one she recognized instantly. Her mother used to draw it on her wrist with ash when she was a child, calling it a blessing, though she never explained what it meant. The mark on the map was the same shape. A cold realization washed over her. This map wasn't simply old. It was hers. Or rather, it was meant for her. Her pulse quickened as she noticed additional symbols. Clusters of dots, swirling pathways, trees drawn in patterns that resembled constellations. These were not random. They were coded, precise, the work of someone who knew the land intimately. And then her eyes caught something else, something that made her breath stop altogether. A single sentence written in the corner, faint but legible. Those who fear what she may become must never let her find the path. Her fingers trembled. She had never seen her mother write those words, yet she recognized the slanted script, the quiet urgency in the strokes. Her mother had hidden this map for a reason. Her enemies, who were now her stepmother and the relatives who treated her like an unwelcome burden, had burned her belongings to erase every connection to her past. But this map had resisted, as though the land it represented had chosen not to let itself fade. She inhaled shakily. The whispers she overheard in recent years, the warnings, the late-night arguments, the hushed mentions of her mother's mistake, suddenly made sense. They had feared this. They had feared her finding this. Not because of what the map revealed, but because of what it would awaken in her. Her hands steadied as she flattened the parchment before her. The vibration settled into a soft, constant hum, like a companion waiting beside her. She understood now. This map was not just a relic. It was a key, a guide to a place spoken of only in whispers, a place so powerful that those who feared her had tried to destroy every trace of it. They believed burning her belongings would bury her identity, her inheritance, her destiny. But the map had survived. And now she knew the truth, she was meant to follow it. She sat with the map spread before her, the faint hum beneath her fingertips awakening memories she had tried for years to silence. As the moonlight stretched across the parchment, shaping shadows into familiar outlines, her mind drifted back to a time before fear, before hunger, before the cruelty of those who wanted to erase every trace of who she was. She remembered being small enough to fit comfortably under her mother's arm, wrapped in the warmth of a woman who smelled of earth after rain and spoke in a voice that always felt like magic. On certain nights when the wind was restless and the fire burned low, Her mother would pull her close and whisper stories she said were not meant for everyone's ears. Stories that had weight. Stories that were forbidden. She remembered one in particular, a tale her mother told only when she was certain no one was near. Her mother would glance around the hut, her eyes moving from shadow to shadow as though expecting someone, or something, to be listening. Only then would she lower her voice to a breath and begin the story of the sanctuary. At the time, the girl didn't understand why the story was a secret, why her mother's tone felt both reverent and fearful. She simply knew the images it painted stayed with her long after the fire had faded. Her mother spoke of a hidden place deep in the land, older than villages, older than clans, older even than the river that shaped their world. It was not a place ordinary people could find. It revealed itself only to those of a certain birth, a certain bloodline, a certain purpose. Some called it the ancestral vault. Others whispered its name only in passing, the Keeper's Hold. It was said to be where the first guardians of their lineage stored truth when the world became too corrupt to protect it in the open. And not just truth, tools, relics, memories, and powers that could shift the balance of anything they touched. Her mother described long corridors carved from the bones of the earth itself, walls etched with stories of ancestors who had stood against tyrants and liars. She said that somewhere deep inside the sanctuary, there was a chamber where the bravest of their bloodline placed their most sacred possession. Some families guarded old weapons. Some stored priceless writings. But her mother never said what their family had hidden. She only said that it was powerful enough to crown a rightful heir, or expose a false one. As a child, she listened wide-eyed, imagining the sanctuary as a place where glowing stones lit the way, where ancient guardians kept watch, where her mother walked side by side with her. But every time the story ended, her mother would press a finger gently to her lips and whisper, "Do not repeat this. Not to anyone." Stories like this were banned for a reason. At the time, the word banned meant little to her. She thought it simply meant special or old-fashioned. Only now, kneeling beside the glowing map, did she understand its true weight. The story had been banned because it spoke of power. Because it pointed toward something that could not be controlled by greedy hands or corrupt hearts. Because it promised that the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, could one day rise again through the one destined to find it. And her enemies, the ones who burned her belongings to ash, knew that as long as she remembered the story, she might also remember her right to seek what her mother had protected. More memories surged. She recalled the day her mother abruptly stopped telling the story. It was the same week strange visitors came to their home, stern-faced men and hard-eyed women who whispered with her father and stepmother behind closed doors. Her mother seemed afraid after that. She hid objects, burned papers, locked boxes, and avoided speaking of the sanctuary again. The girl remembered waking up one night to the sound of her mother crying quietly, clutching something at her chest before hiding it beneath a loose floorboard. Now she wondered if it had been this map. As she studied the parchment on the floor, the lines began aligning with her mother's stories. The river drawn on the map, curving like a silver braid, matched the one her mother described as the first marker of the journey. The cluster of dots near the bottom matched the Three Sisters rocks, formations her mother said stood like silent guards near the sanctuary's hidden entrance. And that circular mark at the edge of the map, the one marked with the same blessing symbol her mother used to draw on her wrist, that must have been the vault itself. Her heart beat faster. All her life she had been told she was nothing. An inconvenience. A burden. But her mother had whispered otherwise through old stories, teaching her without saying it directly that she came from a line of guardians, that her blood carried something sacred. The stories were not random, they were warnings, instructions, promises. A legacy disguised as bedtime tales. She realized now that her stepmother's hatred had never been random. It was rooted in fear. Fear that the girl might one day remember the story she wasn't supposed to know, fear she would find what they wanted to keep hidden, fear she would claim what was rightfully hers. And now, with the map before her, vibrating with purpose, she understood with chilling certainty. The sanctuary, the ancestral vault her mother spoke of, was not just real. It was calling her. And those who burned her belongings knew it too. Before dawn, she slipped quietly from her home, tucking the vibrating map safely under her arm. Every step she took was measured, careful not to disturb the sleeping household or draw the attention of her stepmother, who she knew would be furious if she discovered her departure. The air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of wet earth and smoke from distant fires. Even in the dim light, she felt the weight of the map against her chest, a steady reminder that what she carried was more than paper. It was a key, a guide to something that had been hidden from her for years, something her mother had protected with her life. Her destination was the home of the elder known only as Neka, a woman who had once served her mother and had quietly watched over her since childhood. Neka lived at the edge of the village in a house framed by ancient trees, their roots curling like protective arms around the dwelling. Villagers whispered that Neka had knowledge that transcended ordinary understanding, that she could read signs others couldn't, and that she remembered truths the world tried to erase. The girl approached the elder's home with a mixture of anticipation and caution. When Neka opened the door, her eyes widened immediately at the sight of the parchment. There was no need for explanation. The elder's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, and her gaze softened, full of recognition and awe. "You have found it," she whispered, voice low and reverent. "I wondered if you would ever hold it in your hands." The girl watched as Neka carefully unfolded the parchment, smoothing the edges with a tenderness usually reserved for sacred relics. The lines, symbols, and curves seemed to shimmer in the dim morning light streaming through the doorway. Neka's lips moved silently at first, tracing the map with her finger as though reading an invisible language. Then she spoke, her voice calm but heavy with authority. "This is no ordinary map. It is a guide to the heart of memory, a place that exists beyond ordinary sight, a sanctuary of truth and power where only the true heirs may enter." The girl's heart skipped a beat. "True heirs?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Neka said firmly. "Your mother protected this place all her life. It is here that the history of your lineage is preserved, the legacy of your family's guardianship kept safe from those who would exploit it. Only the one who carries the bloodline and the intent to honor it can access its secrets. The map you hold will guide you, but it will test you. It is alive, and it will respond only to those worthy of its truth." The girl traced the lines again, feeling the faint vibration beneath her fingertips. Neka's words confirmed everything she had suspected, yet there was a weight to them she had not anticipated. This was more than discovery. This was a calling. Neka leaned closer, her eyes searching the girl's face. "Those who tried to destroy your belongings, to burn your past, understood this," she said quietly. "They feared the day you would find the map, feared the moment you would understand the legacy your mother left for you. They believed that by erasing your history they could erase you. But the map endures, and now so do you. You are meant to follow it." The girl's pulse quickened. The fears, the hunger, the humiliation she had endured, all of it had led her here. She realized that the journey ahead would be perilous. The heart of memory was no ordinary place. It had defenses, secrets, and challenges designed to test the worthiness of anyone who sought its truth. But she felt no hesitation. Every trial she had faced, every act of cruelty meant to break her, had only strengthened her resolve. Neka's eyes softened. "Go now, child. Trust what you feel and what you know. The map will guide you, but you must listen with more than your eyes. You must listen with your heart, with the wisdom passed to you by your mother. The heart of memory awaits, and only you can awaken it." The girl nodded, a mixture of awe and determination settling within her. She left the elder's home carrying the map closer to her chest than ever, feeling the pulse beneath it as if it were a living thing. The journey to the heart of memory had begun, and she knew that nothing could stop her from uncovering the truths her enemies had tried so desperately to hide. The weight of the map pressed against her chest as she listened to Neka speak, each word unraveling a thread of understanding that had eluded her for years. She had endured humiliation, hunger, theft, and scorn, believing that her suffering was the result of petty cruelty or jealousy. Yet now, with the map vibrating faintly beneath her hands, the reality became unmistakably clear. The acts committed against her were not random. They were deliberate, calculated, and rooted in fear. Neka's voice, calm yet unwavering, carried the gravity of truths long hidden. "Your stepmother and siblings," she began, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully, "did not burn your belongings merely to harm you or humiliate you. They destroyed them because they knew that within those possessions lay clues, traces of your mother's legacy, fragments of knowledge, paths to the map that now rests in your hands. They feared what you might find, and more importantly, what it would reveal about your claim to the family's ancestral duties and lands." The girl's fingers tightened around the parchment, feeling the subtle vibration intensify, as if the map itself acknowledged the truth in Neka's words. She had always felt an inexplicable tug toward her past, a sense that her mother had left her more than stories and memories. Now she understood that the tug was real, a call to reclaim something her enemies feared she was capable of uncovering. "They feared your rise," Neka continued, "because they sensed the power of your lineage. Your mother was the last guardian of knowledge and secrets that could shift the balance of authority within the family and the community. She protected the map, and the heart of memory it leads to, because it contains the truths they would rather see buried forever. Whoever controls the heart of memory holds the right to speak, to judge, and to protect the ancestral line. Your stepmother knows this. Your siblings who align themselves with her understand it as well. Every act against you was intended to prevent you from ever stepping into your rightful place. The girl's thoughts raced. All the hunger, the theft of her belongings, the mockery, and the punishments she had endured, every act now took on a new meaning. They were not simply cruel, they were defensive, born of fear that she might awaken a truth that would expose them. Her stepmother's eyes had always lingered on her with unease when she handled objects once belonging to her mother. Her siblings had snatched, stolen, or destroyed things without reason. Now it all made sense. They were protecting themselves, not punishing her arbitrarily. They believed that by burning your past they could sever the connection to your heritage, Neka said, her voice lowering. But they underestimated the resilience of blood and legacy. The map has survived just as your spirit has. They feared not the girl they could see and control, but the woman you are becoming, the one who will claim the inheritance of knowledge, power, and the guardianship that was always yours. The girl's pulse quickened, and she felt a wave of anger rise within her, tempered by clarity. She had been treated as a powerless figure, humiliated and mocked, starved and controlled, all while her enemies hid behind their own fear of what she might uncover. But the fear that had driven them to cruelty was also the thread she could follow to her truth. They had destroyed so much, yet they could not destroy everything. The map, now fully revealed in her hands, was proof of their failure. You must understand, Neka continued, her eyes meeting hers with intensity, that their fear is not just of you personally. It is fear of the rightful inheritance of your bloodline, the secrets and protections entrusted to you by your mother. The heart of memory is not merely a place, it is a legacy. They fear that if you reach it, the truth will restore balance, and all the deceit and manipulation they have relied upon for control will be exposed. That is why they tried to erase every clue, why they burned your belongings, and why they sought to humiliate and weaken you. They knew that if they could control the girl, they could prevent the woman from awakening her power. The girl exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of Neka's explanation. Every act of cruelty, every whispered threat, every stolen object now aligned in a pattern she could see clearly for the first time. It was no longer a mystery why her life had been shaped by hardship. It was a strategic defense against her potential, a desperate attempt to contain a force they could not measure or control. She looked down at the map again, feeling the hum steady and insistent beneath her fingers. It seemed to pulse in agreement with her thoughts, affirming the path she now understood she must take. They had feared her, yes, but their fear could not stop her. It was a sign, a guide, and a warning that what lay ahead would challenge her, test her, and ultimately reveal the truth they had tried so hard to bury. Neka's voice softened, almost like a lullaby now. Use their fear as a guide. It points to the places they sought to protect, to the secrets they hoped would remain hidden. Follow the map, and you will uncover the truth, reclaim what is yours, and restore the balance they tried to destroy. They feared your rise, but you must rise nonetheless. The girl clutched the map closer, her resolve solidifying. The fear of her enemies was not a threat, it was a map itself, marking the way to her inheritance, her power, and her destiny. And she would follow it no matter what obstacles lay ahead. That evening she lingered in the shadows of the compound, careful to remain unseen. Every step was measured, every breath controlled, as she positioned herself near the open doorway where her stepmother and siblings often gathered after the day's work. The house was quiet, lit only by the flickering glow of lamps and the faint moonlight spilling across the courtyard. Her ears strained to catch any sound, any movement that might reveal the secrets she sought. She knew she was taking a risk, but she also understood that sometimes the truth could only be uncovered in silence and patience. The murmured voices of her stepmother and elder brother reached her first, low and tense. At first they spoke of mundane matters, household tasks, rumors from the village, but soon their tones shifted, carrying a weight of fear and regret. She froze, holding her breath as fragments of conversation began to take shape. And still we could not find it, her brother muttered, frustration underlying every word. We searched every corner, every hidden space mother ever used. It was gone, vanished before our eyes. Her stepmother's voice followed, tight with controlled anger. I told you, burning her things was the only way to stop her. If she could not find the papers, the parchments, and all her mother left behind, she could not follow the trail. She will never know. That map, that sanctuary, if she gets hold of it, everything we've controlled for years will unravel. The girl's pulse quickened. The words confirmed what she had long suspected. They had known about the map, known about the path it led to, and had taken extreme measures to erase every clue. Every stolen keepsake, every burned garment, every cruel punishment now had a purpose beyond cruelty. It had been a desperate attempt to sever her connection to the past. "We overlooked the corners," her brother said bitterly. "If only we had thought to destroy everything she could touch, she might never have discovered it. But some things survived, we couldn't find them all. And now, it is only a matter of time before she puts the pieces together." Her stepmother's sigh was heavy, almost mournful, as though the weight of fear had exhausted her. "We underestimated her," she admitted almost too quietly. "We thought humiliation, deprivation, and fire would break her. But she is stronger than we imagined. She always was. And the map, it is no longer lost. She may have it already." The girl's hands clenched instinctively around the hidden edge of the wall she leaned against. The revelation sent a mix of satisfaction and caution through her veins. Every act they had committed, every attempt to erase her, had failed in the end. They had believed the map and the path it led to could be destroyed, that she could be prevented from claiming what was rightfully hers. And yet, despite their fear, she had survived. She had uncovered what they tried to bury, and she now held in her hands the very key they had sought to erase. "They feared the rightful heir," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible even in the darkness. "They feared the one who could claim the legacy." Their conversation drifted to other matters, but the girl remained in her place, absorbing every word, every nuance, every confession. She understood the depth of their desperation, the lengths they had gone to suppress her, and the extent of the power she now possessed. The map, the legacy, and the secrets were hers to claim, and they had confirmed it without even realizing. She stepped back quietly, melting into the shadows as the night deepened. The eavesdropped confession had revealed more than she could have hoped. The extent of their fear, the deliberate actions to thwart her, and the undeniable truth that she was destined to uncover what they had long tried to hide. Before the first light of dawn, she stepped silently from the village, the map carefully secured beneath her cloak. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and excitement. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to move quietly, and to trust the guidance that had led her this far. The map, old yet vibrant, seemed to pulse faintly beneath her fingertips as if aware that its purpose was finally unfolding. It had survived fire, neglect, and years of concealment, and now it guided her toward the heart of memory, the hidden place her mother had once protected so fiercely. The path led her first through a dense forest. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches intertwining above to form a dim canopy. Sunlight filtered through in scattered beams, casting dancing shadows across the forest floor. Each step was deliberate. The map instructed her not only where to go but how to move, guiding her along trails hidden from ordinary eyes. The underbrush tugged at her ankles and scratched her skin, yet she pressed on, mindful of the subtle signs Neka had spoken about, the sway of certain branches, the faint marks on bark, the unusual alignment of stones that indicated the correct route. She paused at a clearing where the map indicated a stream, its waters glinting under the early sun. The map's pulse seemed to intensify as she approached, as though confirming that she was on the right path. But the journey demanded more than mere navigation. It demanded attentiveness, patience, and courage. As she stepped into the shallow water, she felt the river's current tug at her feet. It was stronger than expected, as though the river itself tested her resolve. She balanced carefully, listening to the murmurs of the water and following the subtle instructions hidden in the map's symbols. Beyond the river, the forest thickened, and the path became less obvious. Twisting roots and fallen trees blocked her way, forcing her to climb, crawl, and navigate with care. Shadows moved in the corner of her vision, creatures of the forest observing her progress. She did not falter. She had learned that hesitation could cost her dearly. Every obstacle tested her determination and reminded her that the heart of memory was not a place easily reached. It was reserved for those willing to endure, to trust their instincts, and to honor the legacy of those who came before. As the hours passed, the landscape shifted. Trees gave way to rocky terrain, the air growing cooler and denser. Each step was more difficult, the climb steeper, yet she persisted. Her muscles ached, her fingers scraped against stone, and her breath came in ragged pulls, but the map remained steady in her hands. It seemed almost alive, vibrating gently, guiding her fingers to trace the symbols, matching them with the landmarks around her. She realized that her journey was as much about proving herself worthy as it was about following directions. The map responded to intention, courage, and clarity of heart. At one point, she came to a sacred grove marked by towering stones, worn smooth by the passage of countless years. The map indicated a path between them, narrow and hidden, demanding both agility and faith. She stepped carefully, listening to the quiet hum of the stones, feeling a connection to the generations of guardians who had walked these lands before her. The air here carried a sense of reverence, as though she were entering hallowed territory. Her heart raced, not with fear but with anticipation. She could feel the presence of the past, the echoes of her mother's protection, and the quiet approval of ancestors who had watched over her journey. Night fell as she continued, stars emerging above, guiding her alongside the map's directions. She encountered natural obstacles, a fallen tree bridging a ravine, a thicket of thorns that seemed impassable, but each challenge revealed a lesson in patience, problem-solving, and resilience. She discovered hidden passages, subtle footholds, and clues embedded in the environment, as if the very land recognized her purpose and assisted her cautiously along the path. By the time the moon reached its zenith, she stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley bathed in silver light. The map pulsed with a final, insistent glow, signaling that the next step was near. Exhausted but unwavering, she took a deep breath, feeling the culmination of all her trials, the hunger, the humiliation, the observations, the confessions she had overheard, all converging into this moment. The journey had tested her mind, body, and spirit, but she was ready. The heart of memory awaited, and she would face whatever remained between her and the legacy her mother had safeguarded for her alone. The first light of dawn filtered through the dense forest as she approached the location marked on the map. Every step had been deliberate, every challenge faced with careful attention and unwavering resolve, and now the culmination of her journey lay before her. The terrain shifted subtly from rugged stone paths to a narrow trail lined with moss-covered roots. The air grew cooler, denser, almost sacred in its stillness, carrying with it a faint scent of earth and age. She knew instinctively that she had arrived. The map's pulsing guidance had grown stronger, as if the very land was resonating with her presence. Ahead, partially hidden by the canopy of ancient trees, she saw it. A colossal tree whose roots twisted and intertwined to form a natural archway, leading into a darkened hollow beneath. The bark was thick and gnarled, etched with carvings so old they seemed almost part of the tree's lifeblood. Symbols from the map echoed in these carvings, spirals and lines that hinted at a language of guardians long past. She approached cautiously, her bare hands brushing against the textured surface, feeling a warmth emanating from the wood that seemed almost alive. It was as if the tree itself recognized her, acknowledging the bloodline that had been tested and proven worthy through trials and perseverance. The hollow beneath the roots was narrow, forcing her to bend and navigate carefully. The map's glow illuminated faint engravings along the interior walls, guiding her deeper into the sacred space. Every step was measured, the air growing cooler and heavier with the weight of history and protection. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the soft hum of the earth beneath her feet, a rhythm that resonated with the pulse of her own heartbeat. She felt an invisible presence, as though ancestors or guardians watched her progress, testing her patience, courage, and clarity of purpose. At the end of the hollow, she found a small chamber, hidden from all but the most determined seekers. Dust and time had settled over its contents, but one object seemed untouched by decay or neglect, a relic resting on a stone pedestal, wrapped in cloth embroidered with ancestral markings. Her breath caught as she approached, recognizing it immediately from the stories her mother had whispered in secret when she was a child. It was the heart of memory, the object her mother had protected at all costs, the key to her heritage, power, and the truths her enemies had sought to bury. Gently she unwrapped the cloth, revealing the relic in its full splendor. It shimmered faintly, an aura of authority and knowledge radiating from it. She could feel its energy resonate with her own spirit, as if acknowledging her trials and courage. The relic was not merely an object. It was a repository of wisdom, lineage, and responsibility, carefully safeguarded for the one who could endure and seek it with unwavering heart. Her mother had entrusted it to her, confident that despite the obstacles and malice of others, she would find her way. As she held the relic, visions began to unfurl before her eyes, scenes of her mother protecting the family's legacy, instructing guardians, and preserving the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. She saw the moments of betrayal, the secretive actions of her stepmother and siblings, and the desperate attempts to erase all traces of her inheritance. And she saw herself, standing resilient, navigating the trials, guided by courage, observation, and determination. The relic confirmed what she had already felt in her heart. She was the rightful heir, the chosen custodian of the family's sacred legacy. Tears of triumph and relief filled her eyes as she understood the full weight of what she had discovered. The journey had been perilous, testing her strength, intellect, and spirit, but it had also revealed her capacity to endure, to persevere, and to claim what was rightfully hers. Every hunger endured, every humiliation suffered, every observation and eavesdropped confession had led her to this moment. The relic was not merely a prize, it was validation of her worthiness and a beacon for the responsibilities she now carried. She lingered in the chamber, absorbing the serenity and power of the sacred space. The air was imbued with an energy that seemed to whisper lessons in patience, courage, and humility. The relic's light reflected on the walls, illuminating carvings she had not noticed before, each one a testament to the guardians who had come before her. She realized that the heart of memory was both a guide and a teacher, offering not only authority but also insight into how to wield it wisely. Finally, with reverence, she rose, clutching the relic close to her chest. She understood that her journey did not end here, it had only begun. The knowledge, protection, and power entrusted to her would be hers to safeguard, to use wisely, and to honor her mother's legacy. As she stepped out of the hollow beneath the ancient tree, the first rays of sunlight touched her face, illuminating the path ahead. She carried with her not only the relic but the certainty that she had fulfilled the trials of the past, faced the fears of her enemies, and uncovered the sacred inheritance meant for her alone. The girl returned to her home fully aware that nothing would ever be the same again. The relic she carried had changed not only her understanding of her own worth but also the perception of everyone around her. The air seemed alive with anticipation, the faint glow of the relic illuminating the path ahead as she walked with a steady rhythm toward the village square. Every step was deliberate, every motion a declaration that she had endured the trials imposed upon her and emerged victorious. The villagers, who had once watched her suffer, now observed her with a mixture of awe and reverence, sensing that they were in the presence of someone marked by fate and sanctioned by history. Her stepmother and brother stood near the compound, eyes narrowed and lips pressed tight in a thin line of contempt and fear. They had attempted everything to erase her, to break her spirit, to bury her under humiliation, hunger, and fire. They had believed that burning her belongings, humiliating her before the village, and denying her the basic necessities of life would be enough to ensure that their power remained unchallenged. Yet here she was, carrying the relic, the map, and the wisdom of her lineage, their schemes exposed as utterly insufficient against her determination. She approached them calmly, her posture dignified, her expression steady. She did not shout, did not demand acknowledgement, her presence alone was enough to command attention. The villagers gathered around, sensing the shift in the air. The relic pulsed faintly in her hands, a subtle but unmistakable indication of authority. It was a symbol of her endurance, her trials, and the ancestral guidance that had accompanied her every step of the journey. "You tried to destroy me," she said, her voice carrying softly but firmly through the square, "but destruction cannot erase what is protected by truth and courage. You burned my belongings, denied me sustenance, and humiliated me before the eyes of all, but none of it changed who I am, nor the legacy I am entrusted to safeguard." Her brother attempted to speak, a hint of arrogance in his tone. "You think this relic gives you power? It is just a trinket, a piece of old parchment that means nothing." She raised the relic higher, and a gentle glow radiated outward, illuminating the symbols etched into her cloak and the faint patterns of the map that had guided her. The villagers gasped, recognizing the markings as those of the ancient guardians, symbols that no impostor could replicate. The light seemed to touch everyone present, highlighting the truth that had been hidden for so long. Her enemy's previous actions, the cruelty, the deceit, the attempts to erase history, were revealed not through her words, but through the undeniable proof that she held. The relic spoke for itself. The stepmother's face drained of color, and her brother faltered, their attempts to argue or resist meaningless against the force of ancestral justice. The villagers whispered among themselves, recalling the stories passed down through generations, tales of guardians, sacred relics, and chosen heirs. They saw before them the living embodiment of those stories, the girl who had been scorned, starved, humiliated, and yet had returned stronger, wiser, and worthy beyond any doubt. The girl continued, her voice steady and unwavering. "This is not merely an object. It is the protection of our history, the memory of those who came before, and the guidance for those who will come after. It is the responsibility of the one who has endured, who has learned patience, courage, and observation. I am that one, and I will protect this legacy for all who respect it." The villagers, once silent and hesitant, now stepped forward in acknowledgement, their expressions filled with respect and recognition. The stepmother and brother, confronted with the undeniable truth, had no recourse. The power they had tried to control, the secrets they had attempted to bury, and the inheritance they had feared were all now in the hands of the rightful heir. Their deception and cruelty had been exposed for all to witness, and the authority of the girl was now absolute in both the eyes of the ancestors and the community. Days turned into weeks as she took up her role as guardian. She visited the sacred places marked by the map, ensuring that the protections her mother had established were maintained. She shared the lessons embedded in the relic with those who would be responsible for preserving the legacy in the future, training them in wisdom, patience, and vigilance. She oversaw the village not as a ruler seeking power, but as a custodian ensuring that truth, justice, and heritage remained safeguarded. Her enemies, though humiliated and defeated, became an object lesson in the consequences of greed, jealousy, and deceit. They were no longer able to influence or harm the village, their authority nullified by the revelations brought forth by her journey. The relic, once hidden and feared, now symbolized the triumph of perseverance, intellect, and destiny over malice and oppression. Stories of her journey spread far and wide. Children learned of the girl whose belongings were burned, whose footsteps led her through trials of hunger, humiliation, and danger, and who emerged as the protector of a heritage greater than her enemies had imagined. Mothers taught their daughters about the courage it takes to endure and the wisdom to recognize guidance even in the smallest signs. Fathers told their sons about the strength and patience and the importance of observing carefully before acting. Generations later, her name became synonymous with resilience and rightful guardianship. Travelers came to see the places she had protected, to witness the sacred sites and the relic that had changed the course of a family and a village. The map, once thought lost, was now revered as a symbol of guidance and legacy, a reminder that truth cannot be destroyed, that destiny endures even in ashes, and that the smallest, most courageous steps can uncover what the world seeks to conceal. The girl, now grown into her full power and understanding, would often stand by the edge of the forest where her journey began, holding the relic and feeling the pulse of her heritage in her hands. She knew that her trials had shaped her, that every challenge had been necessary, and that the legacy she guarded was now secured for those who would come after her. She had transformed suffering into wisdom, danger into insight, and injustice into revelation. The story of her journey, the girl who rose from ashes, followed the map, discovered the hidden truths and protected the legacy, became legend, teaching the enduring lessons of courage, patience, and the unyielding power of destiny. And so, the village thrived under the guidance of the girl who had once been scorned, her story whispered in every home, her courage remembered in every heart. The map that had been nearly lost had saved a legacy, proving that no cruelty, no deceit, and no fire could ever destroy what was meant to endure.